There's something profoundly spiritual happening when you choose the sanctuary of your home over the chaos of the outside world. It's not laziness, it's not antisocial behavior, and it's certainly not something to feel guilty about. In fact, what you're experiencing might be one of the most authentic spiritual responses your soul can offer in these turbulent times. Has this ever happened to you? You decline an invitation, you choose a quiet evening at home instead of a crowded event. And somehow, inexplicably, you feel more at peace, more aligned, more yourself than you have in weeks. Have you ever felt an inexplicable pull to stay home? A quiet whisper from within that says, "This is where you belong right now." Even when the world outside beckons with its endless invitations and obligations, you're not alone. And what I'm about to share with you might completely transform how you see this deeply personal choice. But before we begin, please hit the like button and let me know where in the world you're watching from today. It's always fascinating seeing who's joining us from around the world. And if you haven't already, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any of our future videos. Now let's dive into something that the great spiritual teacher Edgar Cayce understood perhaps better than anyone else in modern history. Cayce spoke extensively about the importance of silence, of turning inward, and of recognizing that our homes are not merely physical structures, but sacred spaces where divine energy can flow most freely. When you feel that magnetic pull toward your personal sanctuary, you're not withdrawing from life. You're actually answering a higher calling that most people are too distracted to even hear. Think about this for a moment. In a world that constantly bombarded us with noise, opinions, energy-draining encounters, and invisible spiritual battles happening all around us, your soul has developed an incredibly sophisticated radar system. It knows, often before your conscious mind does, which environments nourish you and which ones deplete you. Those sensitive souls among us, and if you're watching this video, you're likely one of them, are instinctively protecting themselves from energies they might not even be able to name yet, but they can certainly feel them coursing through every fiber of their being. Stay with me until the end, because what you're about to discover might completely reframe everything you thought you knew about solitude, home, and spiritual protection. Edgar Cayce taught that when we retreat inward, when we choose the stillness of our sacred space over the frenzy of constant social engagement, we're not running away from anything. Instead, we're running towards something infinitely more valuable. We're running toward divine connection, toward self-knowledge, toward the kind of spiritual clarity that can only be found in the quietude of our personal temple. Your home, you see, is far more than walls and furniture. What you're about to learn is that every time you choose to stay in that sacred space, you're participating in an ancient spiritual practice that connects you directly to something far greater than yourself, a dimension where divine wisdom flows freely and your higher self can finally speak without interference. Now, I want to go even deeper into this truth, because what's happening when you make that decision to stay home is actually a profound act of spiritual obedience. You're following a higher impulse, one that transcends the superficial pressures of society, the expectations of others, and even your own conditioned beliefs about what you should be doing. This isn't about hiding from responsibility or avoiding life's challenges. This is about honoring a sacred invitation that's being extended to you from the very source of your being. An invitation to reconnect with God, with your authentic self, with the divine blueprint that was written into your soul long before you ever took your first breath in this lifetime. The transformation that occurs in these moments of conscious choice is nothing short of miraculous. Your awakening soul begins to develop an extraordinary sensitivity, almost like a spiritual immune system that can instantly detect what nourishes and what depletes. You walk into certain environments and feel your energy drain within minutes. You attend gatherings where the conversations feel hollow, where the laughter seems forced, where an invisible heaviness hangs in the air like smoke you can't quite see but definitely feel. And then you return home, close the door behind you, and it's as if you can finally breathe again. That's not coincidence. That's your soul recognizing the difference between places that wound and places that heal. Edgar Cayce understood this dynamic with remarkable clarity. He taught that during periods of inner struggle, confusion, or spiritual turbulence, the outside world becomes a hall of mirrors, each reflection distorting your true nature, each voice adding to the cacophony that drowns out divine guidance. Your home, in these precious moments, transforms into something far more significant than mere shelter. It becomes a cocoon, a sacred chrysalis, where the real work of transformation happens away from prying eyes and draining energies. Inside this protected space, you're not isolated, you're insulated. There's a profound difference. Isolation cuts you off from life, but insulation protects your life force so it can grow stronger, clearer, more aligned with your highest purpose. Think about the journey of a butterfly. Before it can spread its wings and soar, it must first retreat into the darkness of the cocoon. That withdrawal isn't weakness, it's wisdom, it's preparation, it's the hidden truth that most people never grasp because they're too busy judging those who choose differently, too caught up in the relentless pursuit of external validation to recognize that the most powerful transformations happen behind the scenes, in the quiet spaces where divine light can work without distraction. Write in the comments, "My home is my sanctuary," if this resonates with your journey right now. What you might not realize is that this profound pull toward home, this inexplicable comfort you feel within your own walls, could actually be your soul rescuing fragments of itself from lifetimes long past. Edgar Cayce spoke extensively about reincarnation and the soul's journey through multiple incarnations, and one of the most fascinating revelations from his readings is this: the preferences we hold in this lifetime often echo experiences from previous ones. When you find yourself drawn to quiet corners with books, when you create prayer spaces or meditation areas in your home, when you feel most alive in the silence rather than in the noise, you're not just making random lifestyle choices. You're actually responding to ancient memories stored deep within your eternal consciousness. If this message is speaking to your soul, make sure you're subscribed to this channel so you never miss the guidance that's meant to find you. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Your future self will thank you. Perhaps in another lifetime, you were a monk in a monastery where silence was sacred and solitude was the pathway to enlightenment. Maybe you were a scholar surrounded by manuscripts and candlelight, or a healer who worked in quiet temples away from the chaos of marketplaces and crowds. These aren't fantasies, they're imprints, energetic blueprints that your soul carries from one incarnation to the next. The hearts that have suffered across multiple lifetimes instinctively know where healing happens, and they guide you toward environments that nourish rather than deplete. This is your soul's intelligence at work, seeking the balance it desperately needs after centuries of struggle, pain, and spiritual warfare. Here's where the hidden truth becomes even more powerful. What society often labels as antisocial behavior or social anxiety is frequently something entirely different. It's strategic peace. Your spirit has evolved to a point where certain worldly energies simply no longer match your elevated frequency. This isn't weakness. This is one of the clearest signals of spiritual progress you could possibly receive. You're not running away from the world. You're consciously choosing not to lower your vibration to fit into spaces that no longer serve your highest good. The impact of this decision reverberates through dimensions you can't even see, protecting your energy field, preserving your spiritual clarity, and maintaining the divine connection that took lifetimes to establish. Think about the courage this requires. We live in a culture that glorifies constant movement, endless social engagement, and perpetual external stimulation. Every advertisement, every social media post, every cultural message screams at you to be out there, doing more, seeing more, being seen more. Against this relentless tide, choosing to be with your own soul is nothing short of revolutionary. It's a quiet rebellion that opens pathways in the spirit realm that simply cannot be accessed through external pursuits. This is the journey behind the scenes, the transformation that happens when no one's watching, the profound shift in consciousness that occurs. In the sacred privacy of your own sanctuary, drop a comment saying, "I choose peace," if you're beginning to understand the spiritual wisdom behind your preference for home. The truth is, you're following a pathway that has been walked by the most spiritually elevated beings throughout human history. When Jesus needed to connect with the divine source, when he needed to receive guidance for the monumental mission ahead of him, what did he do? He withdrew. He climbed mountains alone. He spent 40 days in the wilderness. He retreated from the crowds that constantly demanded his attention and energy. This wasn't avoidance. This was strategic spiritual alignment. Edgar Cayce himself lived much of his life in relative seclusion, only emerging from his quiet sanctuary when called to serve, to channel divine wisdom, to help those who desperately needed his gift. These light messengers understood something that modern society has completely forgotten: true power, genuine wisdom, and authentic spiritual connection are cultivated in solitude, not in the chaos of constant social stimulation. The profound revelation here is that withdrawal for spiritual purposes is the exact opposite of isolation. When you isolate yourself, you cut off from life force and divine energy. But when you retreat with intention, when you consciously choose your sanctuary as the space where transformation happens, you're actually opening yourself to the deepest connections possible. Connection with your higher self, with divine guidance, with the whispers of universal wisdom that can only be heard when the world's noise fades into the background. And here's something beautiful that most people never consider. The walls of your home have become sacred witnesses to your entire spiritual journey. They've absorbed your energy, your emotions, your prayers, your tears. They know more about your authentic self than most of the people you interact with on a daily basis. Those walls have witnessed your 3 a.m. prayers when you couldn't sleep, wrestling with decisions that would change the trajectory of your life. They've seen your silent tears when grief overwhelmed you and there was no one around to perform for. They've felt the vibration of your unspoken prayers, the ones you whispered into the darkness when words seemed inadequate for the depth of what you were feeling. This isn't just a house, it's a living record of your soul's evolution, a sanctuary that holds space for every version of yourself, the broken and the healing, the confused and the awakening. What you're actually doing when you choose to stay home during certain seasons of your life is placing yourself in spiritual quarantine. And I know that word might sound negative at first, but think about what quarantine really means. It's protection during vulnerable times. When you're going through spiritual upgrades, when your consciousness is expanding, when you're shedding old patterns and belief systems, you become incredibly sensitive to external vibrations. The negative energies that you might have been able to brush off before suddenly feel like invisible storms battering against your energy field. You haven't yet developed the filters to transmute these lower frequencies, so your higher self, in its infinite wisdom, guides you toward environments where those frequencies simply cannot reach you. This is prudence in its highest form, spiritual intelligence operating behind the scenes to protect the precious transformation happening within you. Leave a comment with "protected and guided" if you recognize this divine protection in your own journey. There's something profound that Edgar Cayce revealed in his readings that speaks directly to why certain souls feel this magnetic pull toward home more intensely than others. He spoke of old souls, ancient spirits who have journeyed through countless incarnations, who have witnessed civilizations rise and fall, who have walked through wars, plagues, persecutions, and every imaginable form of human suffering. These aren't new souls just beginning their spiritual education. These are graduates of lifetimes upon lifetimes of experience. And here's the revelation that changes everything. These ancient spirits incarnate with a soul-deep exhaustion that most people simply cannot comprehend. They've heard enough screaming, witnessed enough violence, absorbed enough collective pain. What they seek now isn't more external stimulation or social validation. What they desperately need is restoration, the kind that only comes from the gentle sound of wind through trees, the quiet hum of their own consciousness, and the sacred silence that allows their battle-weary souls to finally rest. If you're watching this and feeling a deep resonance with these words, there's a very real possibility that you're one of these ancient travelers. Your preference for home isn't a character flaw or social inadequacy. It's a survival mechanism and a spiritual necessity built from centuries of experience. Your soul knows what it needs, and it's guiding you toward the very environments that will facilitate the deep healing and restoration you've been seeking across multiple lifetimes. But here's where the mindset shift becomes absolutely crucial. What the world calls loneliness, what society labels as isolation, is often something entirely different when examined through a spiritual lens. There exists a type of solitude that isn't empty. It's full. It's overflowing. It's communion with the divine presence that permeates everything. When you find genuine pleasure in your own company, when you can sit in a clean, calm, harmonious space and feel complete without needing external entertainment or validation, you're not experiencing lack. You're actually rehearsing a superior state of consciousness, one that most humans will spend entire lifetimes never touching. This is the hidden truth that transforms everything. Being alone with yourself in a sacred space is practice for the eternal state of unity consciousness, where separation is an illusion and divine presence is the only reality. Edgar Cayce understood this with remarkable clarity. He taught that the discipline of maintaining a silent home, of creating and protecting that sanctuary of peace, is actually preparing your soul for missions far greater than you can currently imagine. Think about what discipline really means in this context. It's not punishment or deprivation. It's training. It's the behind-the-scenes work that builds spiritual muscles you didn't even know you needed. Learning to live with yourself, to genuinely enjoy your own presence without distraction, without numbing behaviors, without constantly filling the silence with noise. This is one of the most challenging schools any spirit can attend. Most people will do absolutely anything to avoid being alone with their own thoughts and feelings, which is precisely why this practice is so transformative for those brave enough to embrace it. Type, "I'm ready for my mission" in the comments if you sense that your time at home is preparing you for something significant. The journey inward requires a level of courage that most people simply don't possess, and I want you to really understand why that is. When you choose to stay home, to sit in silence, to be fully present with yourself without distraction, you're doing something that the vast majority of humanity spends their entire lives desperately avoiding. They're running, constantly running, from the one person they can never truly escape: themselves. They fill every moment with noise, with screens, with social obligations, with anything and everything that keeps them from having to face the voices inside their own heads. But you, by choosing this path of solitude and introspection, you're making a radically different decision. You're choosing confrontation over avoidance, awareness over numbness, truth over comfortable illusion. If this resonates with you, if you're feeling seen and understood, please take a moment to hit that like button. It's a simple gesture, but it helps this message reach other souls who need to hear it just as much as you did. Edgar Cayce emphasized this repeatedly in his teachings. The awakened spirit doesn't flee from self-examination, it embraces it. In the cultivated silence of your home, you're not hiding from reality, you're finally encountering it without all the filters and distractions that usually distort your perception. This is where the real transformation begins, not in workshops or retreats or spiritual communities, as valuable as those can be, but in the raw, unfiltered moments when you're alone with your thoughts, your fears, your shadows, and your light. The impact of this practice on your consciousness cannot be overstated. It's the difference between living on autopilot and actually piloting your own existence. Here's a revelation that completely shifts the paradigm around spiritual work. Authentic light workers don't start by trying to save the world or heal others or broadcast their wisdom to the masses. They start at home. They begin in the quiet, unglamorous work of lighting their own internal candle. And that candle, that divine spark of consciousness and awareness, can only ignite and sustain itself in conditions of silence and calm. Think about an actual flame. It needs protection from wind and chaos to burn steadily. Your inner light is no different. Before you can illuminate anything outside yourself, before you can guide others or contribute meaningfully to collective awakening, you must first tend to your own flame with absolute dedication and patience. And here's where the beauty of this path reveals itself in the most unexpected ways. The small, simple acts that your home environment allows, making a cup of tea with full presence, sitting with a book that nourishes your soul, listening to music that elevates your vibration. These aren't mundane activities separate from your spiritual practice. They are the practice itself. These humble gestures become portals when performed with intention and awareness. Every time you mindfully prepare something nourishing, you're engaging in an act of self-love that reverberates through your energy field. When you deliberately choose to read words that expand your consciousness rather than scrolling through mind-numbing content, you're making a decision that compounds over time into profound transformation. The hidden truth is that prayer doesn't always look like clasped hands and recited words. Sometimes prayer is the quiet ritual of caring for yourself and your space with reverence. Sometimes it's the decision to turn off the television and sit in silence, allowing whatever needs to surface to emerge without judgment. These are the moments behind the scenes of your spiritual evolution, the unglamorous but absolutely essential building blocks of a consciousness that's preparing for something far greater than your current reality can contain. Comment below with, "My daily rituals are sacred," if you're beginning to see the spiritual significance in your simple home practices. What many people don't understand is that your sensitivity to certain environments isn't a weakness that needs to be overcome. It's actually sophisticated spiritual discernment that's been earned through your evolutionary journey. As your consciousness expands, as your frequency elevates, you begin to notice something unsettling. Many of the spaces you used to tolerate or even enjoy now feel almost unbearable. You walk into rooms where people are competing for attention, where conversations revolve around judgment and criticism, where egos are screaming so loudly that compassion can barely whisper, and your entire energy field recoils. This isn't you being overly sensitive or antisocial. This is your evolving spirit recognizing that these environments are fundamentally incompatible with the frequency you're now holding. Your home in these moments becomes more than shelter. It becomes a shield, a protective barrier that filters out the chaos and aggression that permeates so much of modern social interaction. The hidden truth here is that you're not avoiding life by staying home. You're preserving your life force, protecting the delicate transformation happening within you from forces that would drain or distort it. This is strategic spiritual warfare, though it looks like nothing more than a quiet evening in your living room. Edgar Cayce spoke extensively about the necessity of finding peace within before we can genuinely contribute peace to the world around us. But here's the challenge that trips up so many seekers. How can you hear that internal peace when the external world is constantly bombarding you with noise, demands, opinions, and energy that pulls you in 1,000 different directions? The answer is simple but requires tremendous courage to implement. You must create and protect spaces where silence is not just possible, but sacred. Your well-cared home becomes more than just a physical structure. It transforms into spiritual comfort, a lap where your weary soul can finally rest without having to defend itself, explain itself, or perform for anyone's approval. And here's where things get really fascinating from a multidimensional perspective. You're not living in isolation even when you're physically alone. There are discarnate spirits, guides, teachers, and loved ones who've transitioned beyond the physical realm, who are constantly observing your choices, your energy, your readiness for deeper spiritual work. When you consistently choose introspection over distraction, when you prioritize silence and inner light over constant external stimulation, you're sending a powerful message to these spiritual companions. You're essentially declaring your readiness for new stages of consciousness, for downloads of wisdom that can only be transmitted when your receiver isn't clouded by the static of worldly chaos. This behind-the-scenes communication happening in the spiritual dimensions is part of your journey that you might not even be consciously aware of. Yet it's profoundly impacting the trajectory of your soul's evolution. Every decision to stay in your sanctuary rather than venture into draining environments is being noted, honored, and responded to by forces that are orchestrating your awakening from planes of existence beyond your current perception. Share in the comments, "I hear the silence speaking," if you're sensing this deeper dimension of your choice to embrace solitude. There's a dimension to your living space that goes far beyond the physical arrangement of furniture and belongings, and Edgar Cayce understood this profoundly. Your home isn't just walls, floors, and a roof over your head. It's actually a living extension of your spiritual field, a three-dimensional manifestation of your internal state. This revelation changes everything about how you approach the care and maintenance of your space. When you look around your home and see clutter, disorder, or neglect, you're not just seeing poor housekeeping. You're witnessing a mirror reflection of internal conflict, unprocessed emotions, or spiritual stagnation. Conversely, when you organize, clean, and bring order to your physical environment, something remarkable happens on the energetic level. You're not just tidying up, you're actively cleansing your spiritual field, creating coherence between your internal and external realities. This is where intention becomes the transformative force that elevates everything. The plants you choose to nurture in your space aren't just decorative. They're living beings that exchange energy with you, purifying air while simultaneously raising the vibrational frequency of your home. The books you keep on your shelves aren't just information repositories. They're holding specific frequencies of knowledge and wisdom that permeate your environment even when you're not actively reading them. The prayers you speak, whether aloud or silently, don't just dissipate into nothingness. They imprint themselves into the very fabric of your dwelling, creating layers of protection and elevation that accumulate over time. The scents you introduce through incense, essential oils, or natural aromas aren't simply pleasant fragrances. They're vibrational, tools that can shift consciousness and create atmospheric conditions conducive to spiritual experiences. What we're talking about here isn't superstition or wishful thinking. This is vibrational science that ancient wisdom traditions have understood for millennia and that quantum physics is now beginning to validate. Everything is energy. Everything vibrates at specific frequencies. And when you consciously curate your home environment with spiritual intention, you're essentially creating a beacon, a point of light that becomes visible and attractive to higher dimensional beings and beneficial spiritual forces. Your home stops being just your private sanctuary and becomes a hub in the vast network of light that's working to elevate planetary consciousness. And here's something that many spiritual practitioners have discovered but rarely talk about publicly. The most profound spiritual experiences, the moments of genuine divine contact and revelation, often don't happen in temples, churches, or spiritual centers. They happen at home, in the most ordinary moments imaginable. Mediums and channels consistently report that their clearest communications with the spirit realm occur not during formal sessions, but in the pre-dawn quiet of their kitchens making coffee, or in the intimate sanctuary of their bedrooms, as they're drifting between sleep and waking, or in those suspended moments of perfect silence when the world feels like it's holding its breath just for you. Truth reveals itself when you're not performing spirituality for an audience, but simply living it in the unglamorous privacy of your daily routines. Write "My home radiates light" in the comments if you're intentionally transforming your space into a spiritual sanctuary. There's a profound wisdom operating in those moments when you receive an invitation and your entire body tenses up. When someone suggests an outing and you feel an inexplicable heaviness in your chest. When you're expected at a gathering and every fiber of your being screams a quiet but insistent no. Most people would label this as social anxiety or irrational fear, something to be overcome or medicated away. But what if I told you that this response is actually your spiritual immune system functioning exactly as it should? You're not being difficult or antisocial. You're protecting something infinitely precious, your spiritual sanity. Edgar Cayce taught that our bodies and spirits communicate with us constantly, through sensations, feelings, and intuitive knowing that bypasses rational thought. When your heart recoils from certain environments or situations, that's not random. That's your spirit, which has accumulated wisdom across lifetimes, guiding you with the kind of maturity that can only come from deep experience. It knows, even when your conscious mind doesn't fully understand, which environments will nourish your growth and which will set you back. This guidance system is so sophisticated that it can detect energetic threats long before your logical brain has processed what's happening. The transformation in perspective happens when you stop pathologizing this sensitivity and start honoring it as the spiritual discernment it truly is. What mental health professionals might diagnose as social phobia is frequently something entirely different when viewed through a spiritual lens. Your spirit isn't saying, "I'm afraid of people," or "I can't handle social situations." It's saying something much more nuanced and empowering. "This is no longer my place. These frequencies don't match where I'm going. This environment doesn't serve my evolution." That's not running away from life. That's consciously choosing to live at a different frequency, on a different wavelength, with a completely different set of priorities than the collective consensus reality. The hidden truth is that once you've genuinely touched the world's pain with an open heart, once you've felt the suffering of others so deeply that it becomes your own, once you've awakened to the immense collective trauma that most people remain unconscious of, you simply cannot go back to tolerating empty noise and superficial interactions. It becomes almost physically painful to engage in conversations that go nowhere, to participate in activities that numb rather than awaken, to spend time in spaces where people are desperately performing versions of themselves rather than authentically being themselves. Your tolerance for inauthenticity plummets. And this isn't judgment. It's simply that your nervous system and energy field can no longer process those lower vibrations without experiencing real distress. This is when home transforms from mere residence into spiritual oasis, a place of replenishment where you can drink deeply from wells of silence and solitude that the outside world has allowed to run dry. But here's the part that most people miss. This isn't the end destination. This oasis isn't where you retire permanently. It's where you train. Something greater is being prepared within you, behind the scenes of your quiet life, and this period of retreat is absolutely essential for that preparation. Comment, I trust my spiritual discernment if you're learning to honor your inner guidance without apology. Pay attention to what your body and energy field are telling you after different types of experiences. You go to a social event, you smile, you engage, you participate in all the expected ways, and then you return home feeling absolutely depleted, as if someone literally siphoned your life force while you weren't looking. You need hours or even days to recover your baseline energy. But then compare that to an evening spent at home, doing nothing that society would consider productive or exciting. Maybe you read, maybe you meditate, maybe you just sit in comfortable silence, and you wake up the next morning feeling lighter, clearer, more centered than you've felt in weeks. This isn't coincidence, and it's not imagination. This is empirical evidence that your spirit is providing you with data about which environments drain your essence and which ones recharge your divine battery. The impact of this realization on your entire life trajectory cannot be overstated. Once you truly understand that energy management is spiritual stewardship, everything changes. You stop forcing yourself into situations out of obligation or fear of judgment. You start making decisions based on what actually serves your highest evolution rather than what maintains your social image. This shift in mindset is revolutionary because it places your spiritual well-being above societal expectations. And that's a level of self-honoring that most people never achieve. But there's an even deeper layer to explore here. That feeling you get when you're in your perfectly arranged, peaceful home, that sense of rightness, of finally being where you belong, isn't just appreciation for good interior design or cleanliness. What you're actually experiencing is a form of spiritual homesickness being temporarily soothed. Your eternal spirit remembers higher dimensions, realms of existence where there's no chaos, no aggression, no draining interactions. In those elevated planes, everything vibrates at frequencies of love, peace, and divine harmony. And here's the beautiful revelation. A silent, clean, loving home is the closest approximation to those higher realms that you can create on earth. When you arrange your space with intention, when you infuse it with prayer and positive energy, when you maintain it as a sanctuary rather than just a place to store your belongings, you're essentially recreating heaven in your rooms. You're building a bridge between the dense physical reality of Earth and the ethereal dimensions your soul remembers and longs for. This isn't escapism. This is conscious reality creation, taking the formless perfection of higher consciousness and giving it form in your immediate environment. Edgar Cayce emphasized repeatedly that spiritual development happens in the invisible realms long before it manifests in visible results. Your home becomes the training ground for this invisible work. It's where you learn to hear the whisper of intuition beneath the noise of mental chatter. It's where you develop the sensitivity to feel the presence of guides and angelic beings who are always near, but rarely noticed in the chaos of worldly living. It's where you practice the profound art of dialogue with your true self, that eternal aspect of you that exists beyond personality, beyond ego, beyond the temporary identity you're wearing in this particular incarnation. Drop a comment saying, "I'm building my bridge home," if you recognize this divine homesickness and the sacred work happening in your sanctuary. Think about the exhaustion that comes from wearing masks all day long. Not the literal kind, but the psychological and spiritual armor you put on the moment you step into the world's gaze. Out there, you're expected to perform a version of yourself that's palatable, productive, and presentable. You monitor your words, manage your expressions, calculate your responses to fit whatever role the situation demands. It's not even conscious most of the time. It's just what survival in modern society requires. But here's the profound freedom that home offers. You can finally take off every single mask. You can be pure soul, stripped of all vanity, all pretense, all performance. In that sacred privacy, you're not trying to impress anyone, not competing for attention or validation, not managing anyone's perception of you. You're simply existing in your truest essence, aligned with the light that's always been there beneath all those layers, silently guided by something infinitely greater than your conditioned personality. This is where the real transformation happens, in these unwitnessed moments of radical authenticity. The journey behind the scenes of your public life is where your actual evolution occurs. Society measures success by visibility and constant output, but spiritual growth follows completely different metrics. It happens in the invisible shifts of consciousness, in the quiet revelations that arrive when you're not trying to be anything for anyone. Edgar Cayce spoke often about the soul's journey through incarnation and the specific challenges that come with descending from higher dimensions into dense physical reality. Spirits who choose to reincarnate bring with them an unnamed longing, a nostalgia for the higher spheres they temporarily left behind. This isn't a vague feeling. It's a soul-deep homesickness for frequencies of existence where love isn't conditional, where truth doesn't need defending, where being is enough without any doing required. And here's why certain elements in your home bring you such disproportionate peace. They're triggers for divine remembrance. The plants you nurture, growing, quietly in corners and on windowsills, remind your spirit of the effortless abundance and life force that flows through higher realms. The books you collect, filled with wisdom and beauty, echo the libraries of knowledge that exist in dimensions beyond the physical. The soft music that soothes your nervous system carries frequencies that approximate the celestial harmonies your soul remembers from between incarnations. These aren't random preferences. They're breadcrumbs your higher self has left to help you find your way back to states of consciousness that feel like home, even while you're still navigating Earth's density. The impact of surrounding yourself with these reminders is cumulative, gradually raising your baseline vibration and making the gap between your current reality and your soul's origin feel a little less vast. And here's where a critical mindset shift needs to happen around the concept of presence. Modern culture has created this narrative that you need to be everywhere, doing everything, constantly available and endlessly productive. But the awakened spirit makes a radically different choice. Instead of fragmenting your energy across countless external demands, you choose depth over breadth, quality over quantity, profound presence over constant presence. You're not trying to be everywhere. You're learning to be whole wherever you are. And that level of integration is only possible when you have regular access to environments where you're not being pulled in 1,000 directions simultaneously. Type depth over breadth if you're choosing quality of presence over quantity of activities. The silence you cultivate in your home isn't just the absence of noise. It's an active healing force working on levels you might not even consciously recognize. Think about all the sounds your soul has absorbed across lifetimes. Screaming battles, wailing grief, thunderous conflicts, the cacophony of marketplaces and wars and disasters that have imprinted themselves into your cellular memory. Even in this current life, you've been bombarded with more noise pollution in a single day than your ancestors experienced in entire years. That constant auditory assault creates wounds in your energetic body, fractures in your peace that accumulate over time. But when you step into genuine silence, when you create and protect that quietness in your sanctuary, something remarkable happens. That silence becomes medicine, a healing balm that reaches back through time to soothe traumas you don't even remember experiencing. It cicatrizes wounds from other incarnations, sealing psychic injuries that conventional therapy could never touch because they exist beyond this lifetime's experiences. And here's the hidden truth that transforms everything. In that profound silence, you finally have the capacity to hear the guidance that's been trying to reach you all along. Divine wisdom, intuitive knowing, messages from your higher self and spiritual guides. All of this is constantly being transmitted to you, but the signal gets completely drowned out by worldly noise. It's not that the guidance stops when you're in chaotic environments. It's that you become temporarily deaf to frequencies that require stillness to perceive. Edgar Cayce's own life perfectly demonstrated this principle. He didn't build his extraordinary connection to universal wisdom by constantly traveling, networking, or promoting himself. He lived much of his life in deliberate quietude, far from commotion and distraction, creating the conditions necessary for consciousness to expand beyond normal human limitations. This pattern repeats throughout spiritual history. The greatest masters, mystics, and enlightened beings consistently chose periods of profound retreat, not because they were avoiding the world, but because they understood something crucial about how spiritual development actually works. What looks like absence from the outside is actually intense preparation on the inside. What appears to be withdrawal is really a diving deep into dimensions of consciousness that can't be accessed while you're fragmented across external demands. The expansion that matters most doesn't happen outward. It happens inward, and that inward journey requires protected space and time. Your home, when you truly understand its spiritual function, becomes far more than a place to eat and sleep. It transforms into your primary workplace for the most important labor you'll ever engage in, the deliberate cultivation of your consciousness. Every elevated thought you choose to think, rather than defaulting to habitual negativity. Every sincere prayer you offer up, regardless of whether anyone witnesses it. Every moment you renounce conflict and choose peace instead. All of these seemingly small decisions are actually molding the energetic architecture of your dwelling. You're programming the space with specific frequencies, and those frequencies don't just benefit you. They radiate outward, creating ripples in the collective consciousness that touch people and situations you'll never know about. Your quiet home unexpectedly becomes a lighthouse, a small but significant post of illumination in a world that desperately needs more points of genuine peace. Comment, "My silence heals the world," if you're understanding the far-reaching impact of your sacred retreat. There's a pervasive misconception in spiritual communities that service must be visible, that contribution must be measurable, that you have to be out there actively doing things in order to make a difference. But Edgar Cayce taught something radically different, something that liberates those of us who feel called to quieter paths. He emphasized that some of the most powerful service happens in complete invisibility, through the focused direction of thought, through sincere prayer, through the deliberate elevation of your personal vibration. When you sit in your sanctuary and genuinely wish well for others, when you hold the vision of healing for people you've never met, when you radiate peace from your center without any expectation of recognition or reward, you're being profoundly useful to the collective evolution. This isn't passive. It's a different kind of action, one that operates through dimensions most people don't even acknowledge exist. The impact of this invisible service cannot be tracked or measured by conventional metrics, but that doesn't make it less real. In fact, some would argue it's more potent precisely because it's untainted by ego's need for validation. You're serving from pure intention, and that purity amplifies the effect exponentially. What's fascinating is how the mature spirit develops an internal timing mechanism that knows exactly when to engage with the world and when to retreat without needing any external permission or social justification. This is spiritual maturity in action, the ability to trust your inner guidance over collective expectations. You feel the call to pull back, to go inward, to prioritize restoration over productivity, and instead of fighting that impulse or pathologizing it, you simply honor it. You align yourself with the soul's rhythm rather than society's demands. And here's what's truly remarkable. Your physical body becomes a collaborator in this process. It starts requesting rest, not because you're lazy, but because deep cellular reprogramming is happening. It asks for introspection, not because you're depressed, but because consciousness is reorganizing itself at fundamental levels. The decisions you make during these retreat periods have reverberations that extend far beyond your immediate experience. Your home becomes the location where you rediscover aspects of yourself that the world systematically erased. Out there, you learn to suppress your dreams because they didn't fit acceptable career trajectories. You forgot what genuinely brings you joy because you were too busy pursuing what brings status. You lost touch with your authentic feelings because expressing them made others uncomfortable. But in the protected sanctuary of your dwelling, all of that can return. Those memories, those longings, those suppressed truths, they're not random nostalgia. They're actually part of your spiritual script, clues to your soul's purpose that got buried under layers of conditioning and compromise. As you peel back those layers in the safety of your home, as you remember who you were before the world told you who to be, you're not just healing yourself, you're participating in something monumentally significant. A new consciousness is being built within you, a new way of being that doesn't conform to old paradigms of competition, comparison, and constant striving. You're becoming living proof that there's another way to exist, aligned with divine flow rather than human force. Write, "I remember who I am," in the comments if you're reclaiming the truth that home is, helping you rediscover